Sorry, guys. Let me just get this in. You did? Okay. Where I been? Sorry, guys, for the delay. Give me just a second. I'm just trying to get the PowerPoint up. All right, how you guys doing today? How about that Super Bowl? Super Bowl. That was weird. Super Bowl. Let me try that again. Hey, how you guys doing today? How's that Super Bowl though? Right? Hey, Chulo. Alright. I mean, like the interceptions and the sharks and the sharks, you know, and the beach ball. The sharks. You guys are crazy. Go ahead and write this title down in your notes. If you're running out of space in your packets, I completely understand. Go ahead and get another sheet of paper and maybe staple it on the back. These will be due first thing tomorrow, and you'll have a new packet tomorrow. So just to let you know kind of where we're at with things. If we get done with this section, we may transition into the next sort of Northern Renaissance. So just to let you know, it'll kind of continue on with the next packet, but I don't have those packets yet. They will be given out tomorrow. So you have one more day to kind of work on it. We're not doing a thematic unit this week, so hopefully that is a good thing for you. Just because I think we did art and technology last week, and I think that, or the week before, and I think that's sufficient for these next 2 weeks. We'll get back into that next week. Go ahead and write down that title again, North Italian Renaissance. We'll extra light there. And we can begin. None of your business. No, I'm just kidding. So just a quick thesis statement on my life. I do not like football, period. Actually, it could be like fill in the blank with all sports, really. Do you like making money? I like sports that are sort of decentralized village style. So if you're playing football in the street, that's awesome. If you're watching professional teams steal billions of dollars out of people for being, you know, this big, annoying, centralized system of business, I don't like that. So that's maybe more of a specific, concrete detail as to why I don't like sports, period, or don't like football, period. Again, so just as an argument, You play the sport in the street, enjoying it with your friends. That's awesome. I have no problem with that. When it gets into these industry systems where all people care about is their sports or their sports team, and it becomes the only thing that they enjoy in life, that's weird to me. Yes, Dominic.
Did you watch the commercial?
I didn't. I told you I did not watch.
Terminator Genesis.
But I'm sure it was great. I'm not trying to, There was one student one year got so mad at me when I said it was right around Super Bowl time. When I just said in general that I just didn't like sports, he came up to me and just felt like I was personally offending. He's like, Morris, you can't do that because it makes how it makes me feel as a person who loves sports that you don't like it. And it got me like I'm like, I know that, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings when I said that I don't think, I think I might have been a little bit more intense. I don't think, for me personally, sports are like the end-all, be-all, or the important thing. I like art. That's my thing. He was worried about that, like I was judging him as a person. And I was like, everywhere else in life, it's celebrated, so I think you're okay.
You know what?
I have a minority view on it. It's okay, I'm not going to affect you. But anyway, so that's my view. People are a little bit astounded by that, but that's all right. I like other things. Yes? I like making money? I suppose, but it's not like why I do what I do.
Make a bet on the Super Bowl then.
Why?
Cole wants the Super Bowl, at least make it lost, so you can make money.
Okay, let's go ahead and begin.
That's why you always
So ridiculous. Such random nonsense. All right.
Make a bet.
Just make a bet on you like money, right? Are you okay?
That's how I made $20 yesterday.
I bet my brother's
Your dad?
You lost all that.
No. Dave. North of Time Realism. So, we just finished the High Renaissance last week. And as important as the High Renaissance is, it only gets the same treatment as all the other eras throughout art history. In part because that's just sort of the nature of the class. You have to treat everything almost with equal proportion, even though maybe on the AP test, the High Renaissance might get a little bit higher of a proportion. I think it's somewhere in the ballpark of like 25% is between High Renaissance and the Baroque era. So it's a good chunk of the AP test. Nevertheless, you do need to get through everything. So just to let you know, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Raphael, these central characters of the High Renaissance are important players to the development of artists as a profession and what an artist is coming into the next era. What we see with the High Renaissance is the most important division between the old world and the new world of thinking. So you can even think about it from any historical perspective. If you go into world history next year, you go next door to post-class, you'll get the same feel. That is, there's a time period before the Renaissance in which you have sort of top-down structures of society dictated by sort of an adherence to religious authority, to what happens after the Renaissance is sort of a general decoupling of religion from the disciplines of society. That is, your politics, your art, your sciences, they become sort of diversified. And as a result of that, we get special experts in each of these fields as things scatter. And so really we get this new world thinking after the Renaissance. Literally that rebirth. To be reborn as a society moving outwards. So just kind of know that that's a general thing. You can even write a little note to yourself right now as you're finishing up High Renaissance in your notes. A little timeline. Okay, a little line with a division right in the center that says Old World, New World. Old World is top down. It's religiously sort of focused. The New World is sort of a diversification or diversity of disciplines. It'd be a good thing to kind of know as we get into the second half. So the High Renaissance really develops the second half, the start of it. A little bit more nuance, though, as we get out to the next sort of couple of decades after the High Renaissance. It's a very small time period. It's like a window of about 20 years, 510 to 530 or something like that. A very small window in which Michelangelo is basically defining that High Renaissance for us. We get other artists as well that are incorporating the northern techniques of oil paints, as well as other developments in frescoing by the 40s, 50s, and 60s of that 16th century, in which people start breaking away from the typical classical proportions, as well as that sort of fashionable pyramidal construction. They actually break away from those structures in order to kind of show a new stylization. So that's going to be the definition, literally, of North Italian realism and Mannerism. North Italian realism will be things like Venice, the Venetian painters, and how they're different than the Roman and Florentine type artists. And Mannerism as well is sort of a continuation of the High Renaissance into these new styles, in which pyramidal construction loses its sort of interest. Starting with a very important painter from the North Italian realist genre is Titian. So his name here, Titian. So know how to spell it so you don't sound silly when you don't do any SHs in your writing. 1488 to 1576. So you can tell him he'd be right around close to the time period, obviously contemporary of Michelangelo, but is producing work up in the northern regions. He's in a different area. See, he's trained by under people like Bellini and Giorgione, which aren't people that we've studied, but they are up in the north developing what's called the tonal approach to painting. And tonal approach just means that you are producing with grayscales instead of with the Da Vinci style sfumato technique or the Michelangelo Scagliante technique in fresco. He's using oil paints, but he's using it based on a tonal system of grays. So it's less saturated color. You can see it with this work here. This is not Da Vinci. If this were a Da Vinci, what you have is sort of a background of mythical landscape. Our character would almost have a luminescence of high chiaroscuro and orange, like the character is sort of brilliantly lit. And there would be a strong emphasis on blending lines to create sort of a hazy foreground as well as a hazy background. But the tonal approach does none of those things. Instead, the tonal approach produces desaturated tones, colors in which feel a little bit less warm. So you have a coolness to the work. At once, though, you can see perhaps the benefit of a tonal approach. This work here has the semblances of a more realistic depiction of everyday life. It might give way to less of that sort of Platonic qualities of the High Renaissance from Da Vinci and Michelangelo, and is taking those same ideas of proportionality and observation and putting it into realistic tones. So it's a very important idea to the end of the Renaissance to know that up in the north they're doing this kind of realism. They're applying it to real life coloring, real life proportionality. So this portrait here is the closest thing right now that we have to a photograph for this era. So this is happening in Venice, that they're producing this sort of tonality colors. And in fact, you can think about even, I don't know, this is an offside, but Venice, even though it seems like it's a very brilliant, saturated place, when you go, it does actually have qualities of tonal, the tonal approach, where it feels very desaturated sometimes most of the day. The areas are kind of grayed out. Some of the areas are less saturated, less vibrant in many ways, unless they have like Carnival going or some other type of big event. The characteristics then that formalize here into three different principles. They do pastoral landscapes. So many of them are going to be very conservative. They're not just portraits. They're going to be like, just here's a rolling, hilly landscape from Italy. It looks pretty, and it'll just be sort of this this aesthetically pleasing type structure. tonal quality and with a slight sense of gold with it, but much less saturated than what we see with Da Vinci. And then we'll also be seeing this idea, this contrast between untamed beauty and carefully balanced arrangements. So in the north, again, with those landscapes, you might see like wild trees or other types of flora that are sort of untamed in the woods. And this is one of the ways in which we're producing new ways of thinking. If it were the High Renaissance again, we would be oversaturated with people in the works, usually of nude quality. People like run around naked, pagan kind of symbols. If we were in the High Renaissance, but we're kind of getting over the idea that it's that we have to have everything of classical origin. It doesn't all have to look pagan. We can actually start settling down and being okay with the idea that I'm perfectly depicting humans, in this case with clothes on. It's okay. You're not doing any. Gone are the days that we're worried about idolatry, is what I'm sort of suggesting to you now. No one's worried about whether or not you're gonna accidentally worship a painting. So all that pagan idolatry that was so fearful of the old world of Christianity no longer applies. And so I'm free to do religious painting in all sorts of ways and break form, even from the High Renaissance. So the High Renaissance will not be the end-all, be-all of how mathematics is implied or how expression exists within religious or secular painting. For instance, you can see here with Titian's Crowned Thorns, the event of Jesus during his passion, in which thorns are placed on his head prior to his crucifixion. You see here at once that tonal approach, which again has sort of golden tones. This is kind of richer than the previous one, but is much less saturated in terms of its chiaroscuro than what we saw with Da Vinci. And the approach does not have a smanto technique. There's no haze involved. Instead, what we see is almost a stylization of the paint itself to create almost what we would kind of consider sort of like an early impressionism, where the work kind of has a movement or a sense of vibrancy or freneticism, some type of movement within the paint itself. So it's kind of there's actually a theory on how to discuss painting, like Wolfland, the Wolfland theory of the 18th century, which is like painterly versus linear. So something that's painterly or non-painterly is how much do you see the brush strokes. We'll talk more about that when we get to the Impressionist movement, which is all that kind of floaty Monet stuff, right? But you can kind of see some of that floaty Monet stuff even in this work here. It looks very sketchy, what we call painterly. So there's a big quote from, I think this is Vasari, which is again one of those prolific biographers of the Renaissance painters. Did you have a question?
Yeah, when was this made?
Does not say on that. 1570. It says
Not
right there.
when, but where?
Where this is in Venice. So Titian is a Venetian painter, but this is currently in Munich. So maybe he worked there. Maybe it was bought by somebody. I don't know. Titian employs a great mass of colors, which served as a base for the compositions. I too have seen some of these, formed with bold strokes made with brushes laden with color, sometimes of pure red, which he used, so to speak, for a middle tone, and at other times a white lead with the same brush tinted with red, black, and yellow. He formed a highlight. Observing these principles, he made the promise of an exceptional figure appear in 4 brush strokes. I think this is an important quote here, in the sense that it's talking about that painterly technique where I'm kind of messy. I'm being a little bit more messy and free with the way I approach figure drawing. In a way I can create just with a few strokes a figure that is not necessarily perfectly rendered, but gives me a good sense of how the structure sort of sits in its space. This is a hard thing to do, and you'll see what I'm talking about as we get further progressing in this idea of painterly quality. Because right now we're still in a place where realism is kind of the thing to do. So to try to make stuff look like photographs But eventually, even that idea of trying to make a painting look like a photograph. So you get really, really good to where you can paint like a photograph. But once you get there, it starts getting boring. Like, why do I need to just paint an apple to make it look perfectly like an apple? Why not start employing my brushstrokes so people know who I am and I've developed my own style, so that when you see that apple, you know that that's Attiker's apple, and that's Benjamin's apple, and that's Jesse's apple. It's your apple. Everyone has their own painting style at that point, and we want to make sure we're doing that. So we're starting to see this now more so than what we have been in the past. We're trying to develop our own styles. Could you see the difference between Michelangelo then and Titian? Could you ever say that this is Michelangelo's work? No, there's too much of a difference. There's a variation in their styles. So know that that's sort of what I'm talking about. If you forgot everything else I just said, know that we're starting to have variations in style formerly produced as artists. Titian is Titian, Da Vinci is Da Vinci, and Michelangelo is Raphael. No. Michelangelo is Michelangelo, etc., etc., etc. Just make sure you listen.
You should just watch Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, just watch an episode of Ninja Turtles. It'll tell you everything about the High Renaissance. Variations in style is what I would say. So contrasting the subject matter of Titian's previous work, The Crown of Thorns, we're also, like Botticelli, using pagan mythos as well. Even still, it's okay. In fact, this one is even more so okay in the sense that we're enjoying a drunken naked party, which we haven't seen too much of. So the Bacchanal, again, is it's a secular work. There is a baby here that looks a little drunk here. Yeah. He's like, yeah, man. He's like, well, who took my diaper? You know, it's kind of a weird thing, but
Those ladies look like they must be down.
a bacchanal is a party in favor of the god who? Bacchus or Dionysus, the god of party, the god of grapes, the god of wine, that type of god. So bacchanals are actually important to Venetian society in the 16th century, in part because they've incorporated this idea of sort of drunken partying with Carnival, which is the start of the sort of the end of a season of craziness prior to Lent, which we're actually getting closer to as we hit spring.
Are you gonna learn about that?
No, not necessarily. That's something that you can kind of enjoy yourself, I guess. It's that Mardi Gras kind of spirit. You guys know what I'm talking about, Mardi Gras? Fat Tuesday, these kinds of things. These are actually part of a religious calendar, a Christian calendar, in which you get drunk right before you're supposed to be like good. And this is a normal Italian thing that happens. And so paintings like this become popular as a result of secular painters being patroned by secular artists. Venice, does it have any religious significance? Not like Rome, right? So we're not being patroned by the popes. We're being patroned by people who are probably incorporating Carnival into their apartments and all these kinds of things. Yes?
What happens on Fat Tuesday?
Well, Fat Tuesday is the name. That's what Mardi Gras means, and it's sort of like the night of craziness prior to you going on your fast, and where you're not supposed to eat or do anything excessive during Lent, the 40 days up until Easter. Huh? I guess. Is that a song lyric? So like the club goes up on Tuesday, right? How does it go? Like the club goes up on Tuesday, club goes up on Tuesday. I feel like such a loser when I don't know the reference to whatever nonsense song it is. I feel so old. How does it go?
On Tuesday.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, we're like, club goes up on Tuesday. That's stupid. Thank you, Justin. Nonsense reference. Okay. Which takes me to an interesting point. To leave off with the Bacchanal of Titian, in Italy, these are becoming more and more standard to have sort of an enjoyment, I say it in the nicest way possible, an enjoyment of the fruits of life. So a little bit more of a progressive lifestyle is existing in the 16th century in Italy. The Renaissance is sparking sort of a progression of sort of loose living. This is not exactly the spirit of the rest of Europe, and in particular places like Saxony and Germany, as well as up in the north and these other areas, and then down into the south of Spain. They're living still very conservatively. They still have sort of a middle-age thinking, and in part their monastic traditions and their scholastic traditions, so their academia, is still very much captured in the spirit of the Middle Ages. So not to say that they're backwards or anything, it's just this different paradigm that they have yet to be, they're sort of insulated from up in the north. And this leads to, which I will talk about as we get to the Northern Renaissance this week. So we're actually looking at it backwards here. So I'm starting with the Counter-Reformation since we're in Italy. And I'll go back to what they're actually countering this week. But just to know, just as a quick predecessor or a precursor, up in the north, they don't like stuff going on in the south. So when you talk about the club going up on Tuesday, people up in the north don't like the club going up ever. And so when they come down to Italy, they're going to be like, what is going on, you guys? This is like not what Christianity is about. They see monks going off into the alleyway in Rome to like, in between prayer services to like go and solicit a prostitute. And it sort of freaks people out in the north when they come visit. One such monk in Germany by the name of Martin Luther takes a trip down to Italy, and thinking that he's going to see the paragon of spirituality in the center of Christendom, but instead sees quite the opposite, and a terribly corrupt and depressing place for him that has, for him, gone far afield of what Christianity and the central message and teaching of Jesus is about, and begins a process of protesting the church and its functions. This protesting becomes very politicized, and then eventually creates splits and major schisms between church bodies as well as political organizations. So the prince and the duke up in Saxony become Lutheranized, like under the teachings of Luther, and there's this major schism between the north and the south that literally has existed even today. So there's a major schism that's literally the Catholic and the Protestant schism. There's a separation there. But as a response to the Reformation, we have what's called the Counter-Reformation, which actually very much affects art. So when we see the Bacchanal of Titian, just know that that's a time period of expansion of progressive value, and the Counter-Reformation is a contraction of that value back towards hyper-Catholic iconography. So when we see the Mannerist period, when you think of Mannerism, think Counter-Reformation. Also, when you think Baroque, when we get to Italian Baroque, also think Counter-Reformation, because it's literally a 100-year period of intense religious iconography, but with some new stylization. So write down some of these basic anchor dates, and I'm going to get a question from Justin here real quick. Yes, Justin?
Did the North kind of write off the South and kind of say that they didn't want nothing to do with them?
It was a progression of about 50 years
So
and some warfare. But yeah, I mean, it basically was a politicizing of a religious issue that allows for, and I don't want to make it all about politics, but it allows for the Prince of Saxony and other German states to decouple themselves from the influences of the South. So no longer are the people dependent upon Southern economics in order to sort of thrive, because no one's Catholic anymore. So literally Rome means nothing to people in Germany that are now Protestant. The majority of them are Protestant, but then there's all sorts of resurgence of Catholicism in the region, and then even today there's Catholicism and there's Lutheran, and they're coexisting just fine. So, but just know that for a time period it was sort of a division of ideas. Council of Trent occurs in 1543, so right at the outset of the late Renaissance and into Mannerist period, we have a Counter-Reformation. And this is occurring as a result of the Renaissance division of Protestant and Catholic going on in the north. In the Council of Trent, they reaffirm certain things that are Catholic that have developed over the course of the last millennium. That is things like Marian doctrine. So when you see Notre Dame and Church of Our Lady and all the rose windows and rosaries and depictions like Cimabue and other very important artists of throughout the Gothic period, they reaffirm all of that. And those are things that were challenged by Martin Luther. Should we really be thinking of importance to the Virgin Mary? And the answer for Luther and Protestants was no, that they'll relegate down a notch. And Catholics in the Council of Trent said yes, these are things that are part of our tradition. Mary is very important. So we're going to continue to sort of venerate her as a very important figure. Other things included, a little bit more controversial, which have been reversed since, is the idea of indulgences. Were reaffirmed, and this is maybe a central linchpin between Catholic and Protestant, is whether or not one can pay for their sins rather than through penance or prayer, but that is like being repentant and being sorry. You can actually do it through a notation that says that you donated to the church. And so this is an important change or division that occurs that the Council of Trent reaffirmed, that it's okay to do indulgences, in part because of patronage. They're trying to pay for churches. How do you pay for churches other than to get people to pay you money that need to? And how else do you motivate them to pay you money unless you say that they have some type of special blessing from the church? And so this is the idea, the logic behind it. But they try to address some of the elements of the Reformation here, so you can see some of the things that they developed. And then in turn, this is going to come out in their art. So for instance, what we call ecclesiastical reconfiguration. That is, it's not so much about the priest as much as it's going to be about the people, and the emphasis on people, on newly created religious orders. So that it's going to be okay, that they're going to actually support their strange monastic traditions. So people who want to live in poverty, they're going to give them special blessings now in ways that they were more kind of like, yeah, you're Catholic, but you need to stay away from me because you're kind of cramping my bishopric style. You know, 'cause I am about the politic. I'm about the bling. You guys ever hear of the bling bishop?
The bling?
No.
We're actually having an interesting contracting going on with Pope Francis even today if you follow religious news. But I mean, there's bishops today that have, like one of them that was literally fired by Pope Francis because he was funneling funds from his church towards a personal mansion in Europe, in Germany, that was literally in the millions of dollars. He had a special flat that he was reconstructing for like somewhere in the ballpark of like $20 million out of his own church's funds. So this is a weird thing, and what they called him the bling bishop for this very reason, because he was all about his own thing, and Pope Francis literally fired him. So we get a new, it's like a counter-reformation contraction going on. No, we won't allow you to do these kinds of things. And that includes spiritual movements and then also political reform. So we're not as interested, hopefully, in, or we're not as overt about our use of religion to help us influence politics. When we see the work from the Mannerist period, it's going to have religious iconography. And it's going to be as a direct result of the Reformation. So you can see in this work here, for instance, this is a Baroque painting, or excuse me, a Baroque sculpture. So it's got a lot of theatricality to it, which is characteristic of the Baroque period of the 17th century, so early 1600s. We see a work like this. Now, how does this work kind of represent, if you were to require to talk about it now, how does this work represent counter-Reformation ideology, just from what I've told you so far? What could you say about this work if you were to say, like, what is going on in the context in order to show that it is, why it is created the way it is, the purpose of it? Yes, Justin?
I would say that's Mary on the cross, retelling bad spirits or unwanted people.
Perfect. And so that's a good aesthetic. So you're just giving me the concrete detail. Dominic, either give us another concrete detail or analyze or tell me what it represents, these aesthetics that Justin just discussed.
Well, I thought the person holding the cross at first was like the Pope throwing out people probably from the council.
But now you know that that's not the Pope. Well, who is that?
Mary?
It's Mary, because Justin rightly developed a gender here. We have Mary, who's literally using the cross in order to repel the unbeliever. Yes.
I was gonna say that it's Mary holding the cross, which is kind of like banishing the people that don't believe.
Now tell me what it represents now in context, now that you know about the Counter-Reformation. How does this reveal Counter-Reformation ideals? Give me 1 or 2 sentences. You don't need to tell me the whole thing to be thorough with it. Dominic, go ahead and try again with the reasoning.
It's kind of like saying Christ can control all kinds of spirits.
Okay, so there's power in invoking Christ. Good. What else? Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
Is that like an angel or baby Jesus right there with the book?
On the left?
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure. I'm assuming this has something to do with maybe Jesus. It could be Jesus in the temple. It could be something completely different and unrelated that I don't know about.
It's something like recording with people.
It could be, and I'm actually not sure. That could be even an angel or cherub. Yes.
It shows Mary like young and like the people who she's like kind of taking out the look old, so like maybe it shows like believing in like Christ and stuff is like being youthful or whatever.
Okay, so there's something to do with the idealization of Mary, which is definitely important, that eternal youthfulness of Mary. Mary was without sin, so when we look at Mary as an incorruptible, she, in fact, is everything that she did was also sinless like Jesus. This is a Catholic teaching, not a Protestant teaching. So that itself is important, so then that's stylized as eternal youth. Very good. Do you see how I've added a reasoning behind it and why it's Catholic? Okay. Beyond that, let's think about how to reason Counter-Reformation context here. What is this saying about the nature of Catholic belief in the 16th century and 17th century? How is it different, though? How is it counter-reformational?
I guess saying how, like, if you're a non-believer, then won't be accepted by the church because, like you said, that
Right.
she's repelling the non-believers.
I'm going to reiterate, though, how is this counter-reformational? Justin?
Well, it's kind of like they want to control and be the dominant religion.
Okay.
So they're saying with this, if you're not a believer, this is what's going to happen.
We're getting closer. And so you're starting to think about Counter-Reformation context, that we are applying a strong and bold action to our characters. So the action of if you're an unbeliever, you're being repelled, and there's an activity, there's like almost an evangelistic quality to this work, like repent, like going out and doing things in order to reiterate your belief. And so this work is strong action in that regard. That we are Catholic and we do not shirk or we're not afraid to say we're Catholic. But there's a very basic thing that you guys have all said, or you all think, that you would just need to add a Counter-Reformation commentary behind the detail. Who is doing the repelling? Mary. How is this counter-reformational? Who should be doing the repelling if we're talking about reformation? It would be Jesus himself if this was a Reformation painting or sculpture. But it's not. This is counter-reformation, which is a reinsurgence from the Council of Trent of Marian teaching. So that is, Mary is the main force in the world that you employ when you're talking about the church. She's literally called the co-redemptrix. So she helps save people through Mary, who advocates to the Son. So it's almost like a third advocate. You have God the Father, you have Christ the Son, you have Mary the Mother, who advocates in that order, upwards. So Mary is the one dividing the church. Literally is showing and repelling those heathens through the icon of the cross. Another issue with Protestants is they didn't like icons. So this is a whole other component as well. The idea of a cross then doesn't actually exist in many Protestant churches and movements. In fact, if you go to a Protestant church, it's going to be a lot of white walls by the 18th and 19th century. Now, Lutherans themselves don't always take this practice. They like icons a little bit more. But for the most part, they're a lot less flamboyant than Catholic churches. And so here's a very brief overview of the Protestant Reformation. I'll go into greater detail in the coming days as we get into the North and the Northern Renaissance. There's a schism that occurs. It's around the 12th century in which we get predecessors to Martin Luther by the name of John Wycliffe up in Oxford. So it's a university professor in England saying, there's some issues here about how we developed our use of the sacraments, of how we're taking communion. There's some problems here from Scripture. And John Hus, who also has issues with the sacrament of communion and baptism and some other issues with indulgences himself. In the Council of Constance, we actually see a killing, a martyring of John Hus by the Catholic Church. And so John Hus is seen as sort of a predecessor up in Czech Republic to the Reformation, sort of someone who stood up for his belief and was killed as a result of his heresy. And then it's the Augustinian monk Martin Luther who travels to Rome from Saxony in 1510, right around the time period where we're thinking that how splendid the High Renaissance is. But what he sees on the streets is debauchery. So bishops going off and prostituting and all this kind of stuff. People groveling at the stairs of the developing St. Peter's Basilica and hoping that their grandma can go to heaven if they just do the number of steps and prayers and all this kind of charity kind of work that they need to do in order to find spiritual peace. And Luther tries this but doesn't have a good thing happen. He goes the opposite. He gets really angry. And so Luther, this German priest, realizes, in fact, and begins to fight against the selling of indulgences, which is trying to save people based on their payment. There was a guy who had come around the north in Germany. His name was Johann Tetzel. So Tetzel would come around selling indulgences as a spirited priest who would have these sermons out in the courtyards of various churches saying, preaching hellfire and talking about how you need to have a coin in the coffer springs, a spirit from purgatory, and so these kinds of language to try and persuade people to give money to the church. He begins. He's also a critic then of the current Pope Sixtus IV, which is actually interesting connection to the Patsy conspiracy, which I didn't really talk about in too many terms, but who attempted to assassinate Lorenzo Medici. So Luther is actually part of this debate, only sort of tangentially up in Germany. The Medici family vying for control as a banker family against the popes and the Patsies, all these different sort of families, like mafia-style families in Italy. He's also going to be a direct critic of Alexander VI, which is that orgy pope, that Borgia pope that I mentioned. So if you think about sort of where now Luther sits, you can kind of go, oh yeah, that Borgia pope with the Cesare and the Lucretia and all these people that were just really not good people. Luther has to experience that as a German monk in a very conservative area, and all of a sudden he's realizing Italy is kind of a gross place. So he uses a very important invention at the time period that will revolutionize. Talking about New World. Germany's got New World too, even though it's very conservative. They got the printing press. So Gutenberg has developed a very fast way of doing copies, and so they got some science up here too, and they're gonna play. Yeah, you got Da Vinci down in the south, but we got Gutenberg up in the north. Eventually, we'll get Kepler and other types of people here, and we will be pushing you just as hard in the sciences. Completely reforming the system of how one gets saved. It's saved through grace alone, which is a totally sort of radical concept by the 5th and 16th century. And that a big contribution of Martin Luther is that he translates the Bible into the common German vernacular, and actually, as a result, standardizes modern German language. Very important. He's like Shakespeare to Germans. Dante is Shakespeare to Italians. Dante Alighieri in the 13th century. I'm just starting him for my English 10 class. And Shakespeare is Shakespeare for English. Okay.
Oh yeah, we're gonna do.
So, here's a nice little timeline. I don't want to talk too much about this, but you have, let's see, this is basically after Lutheran, all the Reformation. Lutheran kind of stays here, but all the other, you got all these other bodies that spread out, splintering into denominations. The idea that you can have in different regions, different time periods, a completely different conception of the Bible, it becomes fragmentary. And so that happens all over the place. So you won't ever know what Christian is any longer, because they have a lot of different things. Much like Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, they all have different factions by, this time period, 16th century. Very different New World idea of being able to interpret the Bible or whatever religion yourself in the context of your culture. So another Counter-Reformation development here about 1540. Michelangelo hasn't left. Okay, he's well aware of what's going on with the Counter-Reformation. And he's very, very what? Catholic or Protestant? He's very Catholic. So he's living down in the south. He's very close to the Julius, the Pope here, who's trying to do reforms post Borgia Pope, trying to fix the church. And so the Sistine Chapel gets a remake of the altar facade. So the back wall gets this by Michelangelo. It's not High Renaissance though. It is actually a Mannerist piece. There is no pyramidal construction here. It's a decentralized emphasis. Jesus is sort of at the top. We get some of these interesting negative spaces and collections of people. But ultimately, the work has a quality of decentralized emphasis, like I mentioned. So just know that that's a very important characteristic of Mannerism. I already talked about characters here, including this guy here with the skin. That's an interesting one. The look of grief on this character showing high emotion. All of our characters here are different tension and tenuous positions. And then this guy down here, I showed you yesterday, as he's coiled up with a snake around him, was actually a critic of Michelangelo. Didn't like Michelangelo's penises. I need to say that because I think you guys are getting sleepy. All right. Michelangelo does lots of naked pictures, and as a result, I shouldn't say that with this camera here. She's like looking at it. That's so weird. Yeah, I can't say that. He puts the portrait of the guy who hates Michelangelo's work in the depths of hell, and makes him naked, of course, and with a big phallic snake wrapped around it too, to just say like it's okay to talk about the beauty of the male form and all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of a little fun fact about the second coming here. Yes.
Wait, two things. How is the snake out?
Because
it's a snake. I don't know. It's just he's coiled up and around, and it's just sort of a screw you to the guy who hated Michelangelo's work. He was actually trying to push Michelangelo to be required to paint, because it's Counter-Reformation, remember, so we're contracting a little bit, which means what? There are going to be people like the bishop going, all those nudity things, that's going to kind of look like lustful. And Michelangelo's like, no, this, remember the High Renaissance, remember how everything's naked and beautiful. God's image. Don't hide it. No, we're about the Counter-Reformation. This is what they're worried about. They're worried about us like going to prostitutes and stuff. That's about nudity and shame. And so that's why in this work you notice Jesus here is covered. Some of our characters are covered, some of them aren't. Michelangelo had to. It was almost like the difference between an R rating and a PG-13 rating. Ken, in a PG-13 rating, can you show nudity? Actually, yes. You can actually show a couple of things. You can show, it's just a matter of how many times you do it, and how long you do it, and in what context, right? So that's sort of like what Michelangelo had happen to him, is that his work was sort of R-rated all of a sudden to show all these naked, genitalias. And so he just needed to tone it down a little bit. So some of the characters he had to paint over cloths, and these kind of things, just to enough of them, not to all of them. The bishop said, "All right, we'll leave that genitalia hanging, and we'll kind of, just a little bit, just to make it PG-13, guys. Come on, the Pope's gonna be in here for goodness sake. We don't need a bunch of floating doms everywhere. You get the idea. You get the idea, right? PG-13, right? Keep it. You know you can say the F word once in a PG-13 movie? Yeah, it's just, you can say it. Yeah. Funny little things like that. No, of course I won't. I don't like that word. So the word mannerism, I've said it a few times, but haven't defined it. Mannerism is from the Greek manera, which means style or character or representation. It means it is actually talking about the style of the artist. So mannerism is just about like, do we have a stylization from an artist that's unique to the artist? And so a very important mannerist painter is by the name of Parmigianino Nino, which is this guy here. You can look him up in the chapter. This is literally called Madonna with the long what? Neck. Madonna with the long neck. It's a mannerist work because he's made her neck really long. And that was something that Parmigianino Nino liked doing. He liked making necks long because he thought it was beautiful. So he stylized the neck on purpose. So that's an example of what we're calling mannerist. Mannerist means decentralizing our emphasis and creating stylized figures that are very manneristic, stylistic of the artist. Yes? That is, that's Jesus. Looks a little bit like an alien baby, doesn't it? It's got an ugly baby, isn't it? Elongated. It's like a 14-year-old in an infant's body, doesn't it? I'm growing too fast. I don't know why he did that. Just know that it's mannerist. Look at that long leg too, like these characters here have those impish faces. It's supposed to be kind of like a fairy, yeah, like these characters here. So he's purposely distorting figures in order to develop a style that creates an elegance. So even our, you know what this reminds me of? I don't know if I can find it though. So you have 3 minutes left. I just saw it on Reddit last night. It was weird. But it reminds me of, what is this? So silly man goes to office. I'm not going to be able to find it. I'm not going to be able to find it. Shoot. It won't make any sense. It's like a video. It's like a short story where it has like a real life scene, but then all of a sudden it's making fun of the fact that whenever you see humans in video games, they look really stupid and silly, like compared to the beauty of the landscape. Because we can't get humans like perfect, so it's like this video where it's like a real situation, and then all of a sudden there'll be like this weird like man like walking like and he's like walking around like he's like falling over things and stuff. It's like really. I don't know. I can't find it, but that reminds me of that Jesus there. I'll look for it and we'll do it first thing tomorrow. So I had it on Reddit. You have to look it up.
I think I know what you're talking about.
It's literally like this like weird like.
It's going to the store.
Yeah, it's like going to the store and stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You know what it's called? Could you?
Oh, that weird.
Yeah, it's like this weird video. Like I just saw it last night and I can't find it. Going to the store. So it's called Oh, okay, I found it. Going to the store was it's called Normal Guy Walk. So this is Parmigianino Nino's Jesus represented in a. This should be considered mannerism. He doesn't know how to go. I don't know. That was really weird. Alright, I'm glad we found that. That was a perfect ending. Alright. Hey guys, take care. See you tomorrow.